This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional life that you're happy with. On this episode, I speak with Steve Dalton, the Program Director for Career Services at Duke's Fuqua School of Business and author of The 2-Hour Job Search. The updated second edition of the book came out earlier this year. Steve and I talk not only about the core components of the 2-Hour Job Search, that's the LAMP list, 6-point email, 3B7 tracking system, and TIARA framework for informational interviews, but also how the COVID pandemic impacts the application of this method. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation on careers and professional life with Steve Dalton. Steve, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
It's delightful to be here.
I'm excited to speak with you today about the book and the process that you outlined in it, the 2-Hour Job Search. And what I'd first love to ask you is, what are some of the trends that you've seen since the pandemic has forced shutdowns in the way that people, students, or people you've been in touch with are using the 2-Hour Job Search?
The first change I've seen is a slight drop in response rates to 6-point email outreach. I think mostly that drop in response rate is coming from obligates. So I don't think the number of boosters has changed. I think more obligates have opted to become curmudgeons to account for that slightly lower response rate. When the economy, or when the global economy was strong, I was seeing response rates of 20 to 40% on 6-point emails. But amid COVID, I'm seeing it regress to the 10 to 20% response rate, which we saw more back in 2008 during that financial crisis when the 2-Hour Job Search was first developed, when that concept was kind of born. So slightly lower response rates, but thankfully it's largely driven by the people who are not necessarily going to be helpful anyway.
I was just going to unpack those terms for listeners who maybe haven't read the book yet. Steve breaks down the types of people that you may reach with your 6-point email, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, into 3 categories: curmudgeons, obligates, and boosters. And what you're really targeting in this process is identifying the boosters and getting on the phone or in person with them to get their support and to weed out the obligates who end up taking up more time without delivering a commensurate amount of value.
That's correct.
And the curmudgeons are the people who just ignore you anyway.
Correct. Actually, not the worst segment. The people who ignore you outright are better than the ones who want to simulate helping but not actually help, like the obligates do.
Do you think there are best days to send these 6-point emails?
I've had salespeople in my workshops before who say between 10 and 2 on Tuesdays, that's the best time to send email. That would work if the 2-Hour Job Search were a sales process, but it's the opposite of a sales process. It's an advocacy building process. It's a learning process at heart. So for me, now that we've discussed and established that our target audience is boosters, these people who are just predisposed to be helpful to others in their job search out of a sense of karma. It's a good deed. They can give energy to the world. They don't need any sort of selling or optimization. They will respond to you if your email is postmarked at noon on Tuesday, or if it's 11:30 p.m. Thursday evening, because they're empathetic to what the job seeker is going through. They're on the job seeker's side. So when people get overly upset by the hour of the day when a job seeker reaches out, that is definitely obligate and curmudgeon behavior.
And that's this notion that obligates look for reasons to not help or to discount or to disqualify the job seeker's request based upon it not being deferential enough or not coming at the right time.
They really enjoy finding ways to blame the job seeker for their own predicament. So that is depleting, that interaction. So I would say better. Plus, job seekers are busy. Not everybody who's looking for a job lacks a job. Some people are looking for jobs while working full time. Students are often looking for jobs while they're studying full time. Uh, so when a booster gets an email postmarked from 11:30 at night, they know why it came that night late, because you were probably in class between 10 and 2.
You mentioned empathy. I'm wondering if you can find that more empathetic target by looking for someone who is or someone who has recently been in the kind of situation that you've been in. For example, we often talk to our students that early in their job search, they may want to look for people who are 1 to 3 years out of their MBA program because they'll remember what it was like to have been that job seeker. Do you think that's a good approach, or would you say that just the 6-point email finds the empathetic people by those who respond?
I do think going towards the more experienced side of your range, so I would say 3 to 5 years or 1 to 2 levels up would be the ideal, because by that point, ideally, this person has some social capital to spend at their employer for a job seeker that they want to champion. But to me, it's the Goldilocks zone. They're not so senior that they're out of touch, but they're not so junior that they, while perhaps more likely to be empathetic, they lack the internal sway to actually help a job seeker move along in the process. I find when people start by targeting people who are a year out, they'll have no problem getting them on the phone, but they'll be quickly frustrated that the phone calls have a lower than promised instance of leading anywhere, simply because a person who's only 1 year into their job isn't feeling too secure in their job yet. They haven't been promoted. They may not know that many people. Uh, so even if they knew the right people, there's a greater risk in putting themselves out there to advocate for a job seeker.
Yes, I think this is a good point to take a half step back and talk about the goal. I mean, I've been living in 2-hour job search land for the last 2 weeks. To take a step back and talk about the goal here. And the goal is to find those internal boosters at an organization who can promote your resume, who can help you get that job, who can act as that booster internally for you, not just to collect information about an organization or about someone's experience, which many students might be familiar with the informational interview as this means to collect some information, to learn from someone else's recent experience. In the 2-hour job search, what you're looking for are those people who can give you that direct line into open job positions in the long run.
Correct. I'm correct. The ideal person is one that plays traffic cop for you within the organization. Every organization hires a little bit differently. What you're looking for is a set of eyes and ears on the inside to tell you how to best get positioned for one of those slots within that particular organization.
One of the things that I really like about the book and the method is that it is, I think you sort of say, it's almost like set it and forget it. Like you can turn your brain off because it's a process that you follow. And that process starts with creating what you call the LAMP list, which is the list of potential target companies. And you say that students or job seekers should come up with 40 companies. And what this really reminded me of is in design thinking, that divergent thinking, the ideation of coming up with a big set of options before you narrow them prematurely. Is that the source of this recommendation?
Um, not I made the lamp list before design thinking was a term, at least in the popular media. So, but that same concept, the diverge before converging brainstorming process, that's really the birth of where that list of 40 employers come up with so many, even though those that create and use the lamp list correctly will never contact more than 25% of those 40 employers. Most don't get past number 10 on their list. So the other 30 companies or more that are on the lamp list that never get reached out to are largely cannon fodder. But by nature of having brainstormed them, job seekers carry themselves with more confidence in the ones that they actually do choose to approach.
So I'm going to recommend that job seekers and students, pick up a copy of the book and learn more about creating the lamp list. But one of the things that I think is really important to highlight here is that it necessitates that broad thinking to go beyond the household names that everyone might be targeting in your program if you're an MBA student. The top consulting firms, the top tech firms, the top CPG firms, and so forth, and to go beyond that. And there are a number of ways that you explain going beyond that. One of those being like looking for companies that have hired people like you, looking for companies where you have people in your network. One of the things that we often recommend to students who may be relocating to the Seattle area for the first time, and perhaps they're interested in tech or tech startups, is to look at a source like here we have a website called GeekWire, and they have a list of 200 startups that are mature, many of them mature in the greater Seattle area. Lists like that, or 50 best places to work, or the 100 best employers in your region. Do you find that those are useful resources for some of your students or the people you've worked with?
My favorite one right now is one called Crunchbase. And I'm a strident proponent of free resources in the job search, and Crunchbase is that. There's a premium upgrade, but I don't use that. The free product is sufficient. What I like about Crunchbase is that you can look up companies by what they deem industries. So if you are really passionate about Waymo, you can look up Waymo, and it will define it as 6 or 7 different ways, including as an autonomous vehicle company. And if you like autonomous vehicles, you can click on that industry title, and it will give you a list of autonomous vehicle companies with a 1-sentence summary for each one. And then if you only want to see the ones that are based in Washington State, like you can narrow it down that way. You get 3 filters for free before it starts asking you to pay for additional refinement of your results. But every time you change your results, you get the first 5 for free. So that's my favorite tool. I think job seekers for best results using the 2-hour job search should populate their lamp list with companies who work in industries, as Crunchbase would say, that the job seeker enjoys learning about. I think too many job seekers forget this is a learning process. As you have more of these conversations, what you learn from one should help you in the next one. And if you're constantly bouncing around from big name to a big name in a different space, it's tough to learn. It's tough to connect dots between conversations. So I do recommend job seekers try to get it down to 2 or 3 industries that they're excited to learn more about, because if you're not enjoying the learning aspect of the informational meeting process, it's going to feel painful. And it's going to be harder to progress over time.
What advice do you have for job seekers who maybe have, let's say, 2 functional roles that they're pursuing, right? We often see students who are saying, well, I'm really interested in consulting, but if that doesn't work out, then product management in tech, as an example. How do you negotiate a lamp list if you have, let's say, 2 functional areas?
You simply just split your brainstorming time in half. So I'd expect to see 20 or so consulting firms and 20 or so tech firms. So I still want 40 employers in 40 minutes. You would just split up each brainstorming method into 5-minute chunks. But then again, if people are dabbling with the idea of either marketing or operations, like literally every company has both of those things. So they should just pick 3 industries that they enjoy learning about and choose companies from that.
I think it's great advice to not spread yourself so thin that every time you're on a call, you sort of have to recalibrate your brain for the industry or the sector that company is involved in.
Mm-hmm. Just worked with a job seeker the other day who his initial attempt at a lamp list was all over the place. It was just big names. And then after we talked, he came back with a list that was tech firms in the e-commerce space. And it was just much more tightly focused. What he will learn from one will help him with his next conversation and vice versa. So I think that's just and he just enjoys learning about e-commerce. So he decided to take that angle toward it, which I thought was brilliant.
So would you say that that narrowing in happens sort of before you really engage with the 2-hour job search process, or is there an iteration where maybe you've started these calls and you realize, you know what, everyone that I've talked to in this space is what I really like. Let me go back to that lamp list and come up with, the 40 companies that are in this narrower niche that I've considered.
The lamp list is almost by definition iterative. It's not meant to be a strategy document that is updated over time. It's meant to be a balance sheet, like a balance sheet is in accounting. It's a snapshot in time. This is based on the data that you have in front of you. In 1 hour, you can determine which 6 employers out of the 40 you were able to brainstorm are the ones that are best worth your finite, scarce resource of time and energy right now. That's really what the lamp list is designed to do. Before you spend dozens of hours networking, let's spend 1 hour identifying which targets are going to give us the best return on effort first. But then as you get down this path, I see good lamp lists comprised of up to 3 different kind of goals. Any more than that, and I'd rather you just get all of those options out of your head onto a sheet of paper and do one informational in each to see if we can narrow it down from 10 ideas to 6, and then repeat that for the 6 that are still in the running until you can get it down to 3. Once you got it down to 3 kind of coherent themes, then I think you're ready for a lamp list. But before that, I would say I see too many job seekers cycling through their head endlessly about all the options. Write down every single option you can think of over the course of a few days until you have no more to add to it, and then commit to doing one informational with each to see if that helps you get unstuck.
So I know that at Fuqua, you use some aspects of designing your life, specifically the Odyssey plan exercise with your students. Do you think that that's a process that helps inform what goes into the lamp list?
Yes, absolutely. That is why we teach it when we teach it. We teach it before all of the students get distracted by these shiny companies that come on campus, to give them at least a clean read of what they were hoping to accomplish with their degree before they see what's on the menu. And every class without fail where we teach Odyssey planning, we have someone come back and say, what if I like my backup plan better than my original plan? And that's exactly why we have them do it, because that first plan and Odyssey planning essentially is coming up with a 5-year plan uh, as fully as you can flesh it out in 5 minutes. But then the twist of the exercise is you find out that any employer that would hire you for that first plan decides they don't need that service anymore. So try again. What's your most likely backup plan? And so many times people's first plan is what they feel like they should do, or what their support network feels like they should do, and they find being able to move off of that very liberating. So big fan of Odyssey planning in particular, and designing your life more generally.
Yeah, and the conversations that you map out in the later part of the book really sound a lot to me like the prototyping conversations that Designing Your Life talks about, as an idea, an opportunity for the job seeker to learn about an industry, to learn about a company, to learn about a role from somebody who is in that company and role, to help with the discernment of, like, is this the right place for me? There's an aspect to that, certainly, to these conversations.
Absolutely. I think whereas the prototyping conversations are more about learning professions, the TIARA framework informational meetings, which is what I feature in the 2-hour job search, are more about turning strangers into allies. So they have slightly different goals. The TIARA framework is much more of a job seeker's infrastructure, whereas the prototyping calls are more of is this the right career? Although I think you get that prototyping conversation benefit out of taking people through TIARA informationals.
Yeah, it's sort of the prototyping conversation is an exploration, and the TIARA conversation is a bit more focused. Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? TIARA is an acronym that stands for Trends, Insights, Advice, Resources, and Assignments. How did you come up with it, and why is it in that order?
I came up with it through iteration, through students asking me, how do I do an informational meeting? And trying things over the course of literally thousands of iterations and years until I found a formula that seemed to work best with minimal effort. So I strive as a career coach to give people recipes rather than lists of ingredients. I think Our profession can sometimes suffer from the yes and syndrome where everything is good. So if 10 tips are good, 20 tips are better. But that's a big ask to make of a job seeker who might be only be doing their third job search to curate a bunch of tips into a usable format. I think career coaches are in a better position to curate that information into a usable format. Basically, make the recipe instead of handing out lists of ingredients and expecting the job seeker to uniquely figure it out for themselves. So the ethos of the TIARA framework informational is to first portray the stranger that agreed out of the goodness of their heart to talk to you. First portray them as an expert in their field, and then slowly shift the framing of your questions to portray them as a mentor. The goal is to turn this total stranger into an ally within a single 30-minute conversation. And that is not a discrete, meaning one-step process. It's a journey that you take them on. So first, there's small talk, where you establish likability. You get them to personally invest. You use the interested is interesting mindset that they talk about in Designing Your Life, I believe. The best way to get them to take a genuine interest in you is to take a genuine interest in them. Once you've established some likability with small talk, then if you were to ask for advice at that point, you would get pretty basic advice. Research shows that creativity can be primed. Essentially, if you're asked to be creative starting from a cold stop like right now, you're not going to be that creative. But if you do a creative task first to kind of warm up your creative juices, you will be more creative in a brainstorming task after that creativity has been primed first. So we want to prime creativity from our contacts before we ask them for advice. And that's where the trends and insights pieces come in. Trend questions are macro in scope. They're industry-wide, while insight questions are a little bit more personal. So we want to warm them up with a macro question before we ask them a more personal insight question. And then once we've got them primed for creativity, then we can start to shift towards more mentor-like questions where we ask them what they would do if they were in our position.
You talked about almost like the rapport building at the beginning before we launch into TIARA. So like showing that interest in people. What are some ways that you recommend to students to do that?
Listening is the single most important piece of a good performance in informational meetings. I think people overlook that. I think they think success is about reciting the right words in the right order, but it's not anything of the sort. It's about demonstrating that you're truly listening. Olivia Fox-Cabana wrote a wonderful book called The Charisma Myth, and in it she found that the single biggest predictor of whether you're perceived to be considered likable by your conversation partners is nothing that you actually say. It's how well you're perceived to be listening, which is kind of a game changer. When you think, I need to impress them, I need to tell them what I know, and that's not what actually moves the needle. It's demonstrating that you've genuinely heard what they said. That's going to be the more effective path. A different Harvard study showed that the single most likable behavior within conversations, the most likable kind of activity you could do in a conversation is to ask a follow-up question on an answer someone's already given you. And I think that study kind of captures the same insight. When you ask a good follow-up question to information that they just shared, you're demonstrating that you're truly listening and that you found whatever they said to you preceding your follow-up question to be interesting and worthy of further discussion.
Do you think that the pandemic lockdown that we're in right now changes the art of listening for students in these conversations?
I don't think it changes the art. I think it amplifies the importance by an order of magnitude. We're all feeling disconnected and shut in right now. It's not been a happy experience. This pandemic. Funny thing about pandemics is they're not pleasant experiences. And everybody's feeling very isolated. So I would argue that people need to feel heard now more than perhaps ever before in history. So I always hear from job seekers they're concerned when job searching during recessionary periods like what we're entering, that they feel like they're imposing on the people they reach out to. And I would argue their job seekers today are doing just the opposite. They're giving smart people a nice 30-minute conversation where they get to talk about how smart they are and all that they've accomplished. That's a gift. that a job seeker can give a contact. And I really, really want job seekers to realize that and treat the conversation that way. It's not about selling yourself. It's not about impressing these strangers. It's about letting them feel heard for a half an hour, forgetting that they're asked to do the work of 3 people right now just to get their company through the year. Give them a half an hour off to reflect positively on all they've done.
I think that I read an article earlier in the year about one of the things that we're all missing, which are interactions with strangers. The person who you may have had a conversation with at the coffee shop or waiting for the elevator or on the subway or bus. And given what you just said, I think about the value of this sort of random conversation that the job seeker may have with the person that they're targeting as an opportunity, giving an opportunity for that person to have an interaction with someone that is, not in their household unit and not on their team at work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You can be remarkably frank with people who are not living inside the same walls as you right now or committed to the same business goals. So I think job seekers would be surprised by the amount of candor they'll receive, which makes these informational meetings just a terribly effective way to understand if a particular career path is a good fit for you.
So what surprised you most since the pandemic struck and changed the way students, the way that students are experiencing school and experiencing the job search?
I think the most surprising thing was they ask how to modify the 2-hour job search for when things get tough economically, not realizing that this process was built for the 2008 financial crisis. It was built for recessionary periods. You had more room for error a year or two ago before the pandemic hit. But I think people are surprised that a script has actually been made already for a moment like this. But it does require moving forward. We can't look backward to how things were, how strong the economy was and all that we've lost. We have to accept that there are fewer jobs out there right now. Fewer employers are hiring. The way that you get yourself to the front of the queue is you get people inside of those organizations to know you and like you and want to argue for you. But that's a skill set that they've never been trained for. It's ironic to me that most universities will require a calculus class or similar in their core, but they won't require a listening class or a go ask a favor from a stranger class or an informational meeting class, this very real, critical, lifelong skill. The ability to take strangers and turn them into advocates on demand. That is just a universal skill that every professional needs to have. But their universities did not ensure they had that skill set before they graduated them out into the world. And I hate that. I feel bad about that. That my students had to go back and get an MBA before they got the chance to learn it. So I think that's what surprises me most is that some people pick up the need to develop the skill right away, and other people want to keep wishing for the past to return, where you could apply online and occasionally hear back from someone about an interview. It's tougher times. Well, I need to submit more online applications. But that's just running into a plexiglass wall over and over and over again. At a certain point, you have to accept that you're not going to get through the plexiglass wall. You need to walk around it.
Plexiglass wall. It's appropriate for the time we're in, the pandemic. Do you think that, so I know that in the book, you talk a little bit about the difference between sort of the external job search, the like off-campus job search, and the internal job search, where companies are coming to campus and recruiting. How do you think students can balance the use of the 2-hour job search, if they're in a campus environment where there's active recruiting going on? And how do you think that it differs, or the use of the 2-hour job search methodology differs when an MBA candidate is in the internship search versus the full-time search?
I'll answer the second part first. I don't think there's any difference between the internship and the search and the full-time search. So I think it's the same exact process. It's like learning to tie your shoes. that process doesn't change over time, but the earlier you learn it, the longer you'll enjoy the benefits of being able to tie your own shoes. I think the 2-hour job search is the same way. This is how you will get jobs after you graduate. Might as well embrace the skill of reaching out to strangers and asking them why they're so good at their job and listening well now, while it can pay such higher dividends for a longer period of time. Back to the first part of the question, I think the way to balance your what we call campus versus custom now. Campus is what comes to recruit you at your university, and custom are the choices you make yourself about which employers to proactively go network with. I think campus, feel free to experiment, try new things, sample the goods that are available to you because they are efficient to get in touch with. But I do recommend saving your lamp list for primarily custom employers, both because it helps you diversify your odds. If everyone just fights harder for those same finite amount of opportunities on campus, the pie doesn't grow. You just have to work harder to get what used to take less work last year. So I encourage job seekers to resist the urge to just apply the 2-hour job search to their campus process because it won't win if everyone does that. I recommend for your custom search, that's where the lamp list is most helpful. Now, one change I've recommended this year is it's okay to have a handful of campus employers in your lamp list because this is a weird year. Like, you're going to need to do more than in easier years to get jobs. I'm fairly confident on that. But where I see lamp lists that are kind of not getting the point is when I see all the tech giants listed at the top. I see Amazon and Microsoft and Apple and Google, and those companies actually have nothing in common with one another. What you learn from one will not help you speak to the next one. And they're such giant organizations that you'll never finish networking with them. It's okay to have Google at the top of your lamp list, but maybe you're really fired up about search engines, in which case I'd expect to see Microsoft and Bing right below it, and then I guess maybe Ask Jeeves and then DuckDuckGo. But I want to see some theme where when you speak to one of those companies, it will help you with the next one and vice versa. So that's how I recommend balancing the campus versus custom search. Campus, feel free to experiment, have your areas of focus, but custom, narrow on up to 3 themes of companies that you want to learn more about.
Shifting gears, I want to go back to, we didn't really talk about it yet, but I want to talk about the 6-point email. We don't have to go through all those points because people can look it up. But basically, the gist is it is a very short, very direct. You recommend now 75-word outreach email where you state your connection up front and you clearly ask for what it is that you want, which is some time with this person to talk to them about their career, their company, their industry. But my real question is, are there people who ignore the first request intentionally, even boosters? I know you talk about curmudgeons may do this, but are there boosters who maybe want to test your sincerity or your interest level and ignore that first request to see if you follow up?
I would still consider that by definition obligate behavior. Now, obligates will engage with you, but each one of them has a different arbitrary hurdle. And for many obligates, you can't overcome that hurdle. They'll find a way to blame you for why they're not going to respond at a certain point. But I don't consider it true booster behavior if they arbitrarily make job seekers jump through hoops. Now, you may have a truly busy booster who just simply couldn't get back to you or got lost in their email, who needs that tickler a week and a half later to engage with you. But it was out of the goodness of their heart rather than a premeditated hoop that they were having you jump through. Obligates can be very helpful in your job search. They can provide very important referrals, but because you don't know what everybody's individual cutoff is, it's critical to remember that boosters are the target audience and they don't have arbitrary hoops to make job seekers jump through. That said, I do find that those helpful obligates who respond after the first attempt only for the second attempt, those tend to be on the more helpful side of the obligate spectrum.
So that's like the obligate who replies to your 7 business day reminder, maybe inside the 3 days.
Yes.
Right? So you, and just to recap for those who haven't read the book, you have this 3B7 model where you set reminders in your calendar app for 3 business days later, and then 7 business days later. And if the person you've reached out to hasn't responded in 3 business days, then you find another contact at that company. And if at 7 business days, you send the reminder email to the first contact.
Correct.
I got it right.
Very well done.
Winning.
It is the most technical thing that I teach. I've got a YouTube video up on it, and even after watching the YouTube video, it's still I have some guiding questions in the comments section just to make sure that people got the main points correct, because it's technical. But at heart, it's very simple. Anytime you email somebody for the first time, you set a 3 business day reminder on them in your calendar, Outlook calendar, or Google Calendar, and a 7 business day reminder on them. The 3 business day reminder, if they haven't responded by then, they're probably not going to respond to you. So you don't need to wait around another week to get ignored by someone. Let's hedge your bets. Try a second person, set 3 and 7 business day reminders on them, and then follow up with that first person after 7 business days. And the process auto perpetuates.
So the 2-hour job search is obviously something that person can do on their own. Do you think there is value in a school setting for students to work together?
I've seen many, many schools, including my own at Fuqua, try this, and I've not seen it be successful. This is an individual sport at heart. Everybody has a different tolerance and readiness for it. There is no way to aggregate demand. There's maybe a great support group out there for job seekers, but there is no support group that works under the 2-hour job search approach that I've seen to date.
So you would say that a school maybe teaches the method, but then it's up to students to engage with it and use it effectively.
Yes, and definitely in tandem with their university if their university is the one that taught it to them. And then I would hope that they would in turn mentor others in the process.
What do you think the number one mistake that you've seen students make in the time that you've been working with them with this model?
I think they treat the 2-hour job search like it's cooking instead of baking the first time through it. And what I mean by that is when you cook, you can take certain liberties, you can try new things. And if the experiment doesn't go right, you can season to taste at the end of the process, add more salt and pepper or garlic or whatever you want, and make it edible. But the 2-hour job search is a recipe, and it's like baking, meaning if you like when you're baking a cake, if you don't add salt or you add the wrong amount or at the wrong time, the cake doesn't rise and you can't save it. So what my recommendation to job seekers is try the 2-hour job search exactly as written. If you follow the recipe exactly, I can tell you exactly what will happen next. Once you've done it once, then feel free to add some flair to it. But even I see people starting to cheat or starting to make exceptions as early as the lamp list. They'll start with fewer than 40 employers. And to a person, I've never seen anyone be successful in the process when they start with fewer than 40 employers. It's simply not enough brainstorming to get them out of this what I call an artificial desperation mindset, which is where they voluntarily fixate on a small universe of employers that is not representative of how many options they actually have. So the job seeker embraces this mindset where they need every single conversation to work out, and employers are very good at detecting that neediness, and it's not an attractive look.
So in the 2-hour job search, the goal is to identify this internal booster. How many conversations at a company do most people have before they find that really solid booster? Does it happen on the first conversation, or is it 2 or 3 of these TIARA conversations in that they really get someone in the right spot that is pointing them in the direction of a hiring manager?
I have had people who have done it very quick. I've had people who started the 2-hour job search on a Monday, literally made their lamp list and sent their emails out, and they landed an offer by Friday of the same calendar week. That's not normal. That's an exceptional result. But this process can happen very quick. The returns are just very stochastic. They're intermittent. So you don't know, like, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince, but the prince will be worth it. And sometimes you get lucky and kiss the right frog on the first try. In my experience, it's folly to assume as a job seeker that you could guess the right person to speak to of just looking through LinkedIn profiles in your first try. So it usually will take, I would say, 2 conversations. Well, it will take 2 in a row. So maybe you'll be doing a handful of informational meetings, but it'll take a while to find a true booster. But sometimes you'll find obligates who don't really want to advocate for you. Once you find a true booster, generally there's one conversation after that. They will be your traffic cop. They'll point you to the right person to speak to next, and that person will get you in the process. So most often it's going to be two once you've found the right person, but whether you find that right person on your first try or your fifth try, that's completely up in the air.
And who drives that second conversation? Is it the job seeker that reaches back out, or is it the booster?
That varies. So if you get referred to a decision maker within your employer by a booster that you spoke to previously, sometimes they just turn it into a screening interview. Sometimes they let you manage it like an informational meeting. You just have to be light on your toes in that case. But what you can guarantee is that that person's going to be nicer to you and less skeptical than the previous people you had spoken to who didn't have the benefit of one of their colleagues vouching for you in advance.
We're coming to the end of our time here together, Steve, and I wanted to be sure to ask you, are there resources that you recommend beyond the website, which is 2hourjobsearch.com? Are there resources that you find yourself recommending to students and job seekers regularly?
I do have a LinkedIn group for the book called 2-Hour Job Search Q&A Forum, where I answer questions from readers and practitioners. So there's about 6,500 of us in there now. So that's a great place if you have questions as you go through this process and you want to hear from me. I'm on there every few days. So I'm happy to answer questions. I really like getting the word out. Because without word of mouth, the 2-Hour Job Search wouldn't have gotten a revised edition. It wouldn't have happened. So I want to make sure my job seekers who would embrace it have a good experience with it. In terms of other resources, I'm just a huge fan of Crunchbase. I find that to be a true delight for brainstorming employers. It's so intuitive. It gives you this Tinder-like interface where you can just swipe right on the employers you've never heard of that sound pretty good and left on the ones that you don't want to engage with any further. So it keeps proposing ideas to you and you can just pick from those to get up to 40 in 40 minutes. It's my favorite tool.
That's great. I'm going to put it on my list. And last, I'm just wondering, what have you enjoyed most over the last decade of working with the 2-Hour Job Search and revising the book and working with students? What's been the most delightful part of that experience?
Oh, what a lovely question. I think it's that moment in a job seeker's eyes, or when I'm not working with them in person, in their tone, in their email, where I realize the scales have been lifted from their eyes and they realize there's a different, better, and easier way to go about their search that's less demeaning and humiliating and dehumanizing. Where they realize, like, oh, this is how you take strangers and turn them into advocates. And now this whole networking thing doesn't scare me anymore. I'd rather do other things. I'd rather be on my Switch playing video games right now, but I know how to do this and I'm not scared of it. What I love so much about that moment is that these people are no longer beholden to their employers. They no longer need to suffer bad treatment from the people who give them paychecks because they now have the ability to source their own work. So they just have an ability to provide more effectively for themselves and their loved ones. And that moment of liberation, that's really what I find delightful. People who didn't get the benefit of learning this lifelong skill in undergrad suddenly at age 35 or age 50 suddenly have that skill after thinking it wasn't something that even existed. That's really what's delighted me about teaching this process over the last decade.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Steve. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation on careers and professional life with me. And thank you for writing the book, The 2-Hour Job Search.
Absolutely my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
For more information about the 2-Hour Job Search, listeners can visit 2hourjobsearch.com using the number 2 or the 2-Hour Job Search Q&A forum on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to both in the show notes. Foster MBA students can access the 2-part workshop on the 2-Hour Job Search presented by Stacy Duhan and me on Canvas, or ask your career coach. Thank you for listening to another episode of Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. You can email me at gheller@uw.edu. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or classmate. I don't know if you recognize what I did, but I used TIARA throughout the interview.
I was aware at moments, yes.
Yeah.
You had me wrapped up in the moment that I did not notice it after the first couple.